Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Oneness-ential podcast. I'm your host, Julian Moreno, and thank you again for stopping by and clicking this episode. It's been about 4 weeks since the last, or episode one, or pilot episode had released. And a lot of that time was just me trying to figure out how I wanted to make this episode, the second episode of the podcast. And pretty much those 3-4 weeks or so was just me kind of going back and forth with ideas. Do I want to go a more serious approach with the next episode, or go something more casual, something I'm more experienced in? Or did I want to just go straight apologetics, stuff like that? And so it took quite a bit. I'm back. I did not quit already. It's just I'm trying to take in everything that I can, all the comments, suggestions, taking into consideration the good things, the bad things from the first episode, and just kind of how to approach this one. And so I decided to kind of bunker down and write something. I have a lot of ideas, but I never finished any of the scripts. So I decided about a week ago to actually sit down and finish one. And what I ended up finishing is something more lighthearted, something just fun. At least for me, it's fun to talk about this specific topic. And hopefully, just because this seems to be a more major reoccurring thing in Pentecost right now, hopefully I help some people who either want to start this or to just get more information on this topic. And so the topic I want to talk about is I labeled it, or I titled it something nice. Pretty much this episode will be called The Survival Guide to Coffee Shops, or to Church Coffee Shops. Survival Guide to Church Coffee Shops. There you go. And the reason I made this script, or the reason I'm recording this episode, is that oftentimes, as someone who's in my field, if you don't know, I've been working in the coffee repair business for about 4 years now. I've also worked about a year as a barista in a coffee shop. And I would say my second biggest hobby would be coffee and coffee related things. When I'm talking coffee, I'm talking about just coffee culture, espresso culture, the machines, of course, repairing them when machines are great, and stuff like that. So I also just sell a lot of these machines through the company I work for. So I just have a lot of insight on different brands, which ones to pick from. And I also, in between finding my job now, the one I'm working at currently, and the coffee shop job I used to work when I was a part-time barista, I ended up opening a coffee window inside of my local church, which that's been running for quite a long time now, and pretty much my way of giving back to the place that I grew up in, my home church. And so I have quite a weird experience. Well, I have a lot of experience, but I didn't necessarily start with a big budget, so I kind of danced in all of the different spectrums of how to start, what equipment to buy, and of course, if I were to redo it all over, I would have such a different, trajectory than what I had originally. But nonetheless, that's what I hope this episode could be for somebody who's listening, somebody who's watching, who wants to start a coffee shop in their church, or wants to start doing this as a hobby or even a side business. So I know a lot of people who do that. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. The reason I got into it is I personally enjoy making people drinks. That's not just coffee, that's teas and matchas and stuff like that. And so I hope you can find something good in this also. So I guess the first point to kind of start this whole thing is, should you really even want a coffee shop, and things to consider before you start one, or before you decide to ask if you could start one. And so I have a few different kind of broad categories that I kind of want to go over. Some of them are just pure machines, what brands to get at different price ranges. One's just completely about coffee. Of course, maintenance, since that's kind of the big one that I deal with personally, since I'm a repair technician for these machines. Also, just random resources and different recipes, alternative milks, different drinks, and the reason you would want even different drinks to begin with. And of course, final thoughts. So one of the biggest things that I was told is I should try a script. So I got everything written down in front of me. This should go a lot smoother than the first episode. But most of it's not, most of it's still off the cuff. Like I just have kind of bullet points. So yeah, let's get started. So I guess the first thing to consider before even kind of touching on all this dense information is that should you or could you even start a coffee shop? And a why? At least from a church perspective, because I'm just assuming you're watching this episode apart from entertainment purposes, but to get some more insight on, how to start, where to start, etc. And so I guess the first point to think about is, do you need one? Does your church have a space for one? Because this stuff gets a little bit messy, and of course, there's money that has to be thrown into this for coffee, beans, etc. And so the reason why I did it, or the reason I started mine, or started the coffee window in our church, was one, just from a hobby standpoint. I really enjoyed making drinks as a part-time barista. But secondly was that I was able to give back, and I was able to create a somewhat culture, a small culture inside of the church, which for the most part was a positive. As in, it's nice to have people who come in really early. Again, people you're already accustomed to because this is your church, of course. And enjoy a drink before your service or enjoy a drink after. For us, it's a little different. We have a in between kind of break between both. And so, from one aspect, that's just a really nice culture. But you do have to understand that does take work. That does take getting there early in the morning and figuring it out. There's other approaches to it that makes it easier, but I'm just going from a very traditional early morning, trying to treat this window as a actual coffee shop. And one of the things I've seen over the years since our window has been open is that it's actually a really good talking point for visitors and for people who are first time in the church to see kind of a more like, how would I describe this? I would assume, just because I did grow up in the church pretty much my whole life, but if I were to say first come into the doors of a church and probably know the one person who invited me or one or two people, it's nice knowing that there's an environment that's very relaxed, very positive, and your church overall should be positive, but there's a different atmosphere when it comes to a gathering for coffee or really cafe culture almost. So that's kind of the reason it would make sense to. It's really good. There's a bunch of times where we've had an event and the coffee window was open, and it's really nice to kind of allow that atmosphere into the room, and it just more welcoming in my opinion. But of course, you can't have that unless you have a coffee shop, and you can't have a coffee shop unless you have the coffee equipment. So the first talking point that we're going to get to is actual equipment, just because this is probably the most important one. I get asked all the time by ministers who are visiting, or people who want to get into the coffee world, or the espresso world, specialty coffee, if that's usually the term. And so yeah, I just want to go through a different types of brands, different things to consider. How do you want to start? How much money you want to start with? And kind of go point by point, different price ranges, the pros and cons of all of them. So just to give a little tiny bit of backstory, I was in a special, I guess, predicament when I started the window because, well, originally for the first year or two, I had no job when I was doing this window, so I was actually baking to make money or finding ways to make money so that I could source coffee beans for this. There goes my phone. For this window. I think it was about a year. But to be fair, we weren't selling coffee. We're actually just giving it away. So there has to be ways where we're trying to source money. However, I started off with a machine that I personally bought. I don't recommend buying it, but this was a machine I personally bought when I first started, and that was a $100 DeLonghi. I forget the name of it, but it's the ones you usually find in Target. Single boiler machines made out of aluminum, inside, outside, completely plastic. And I ran the coffee shop for the longest time on that machine, at least until I was able to get some sort of money towards a new machine. And that's when I bought my first real machine. And so we're going to skip the 100 to, let's just say, 500, around their price range, because really at that point, or at that, I guess, price range, you could find machines. Just to kind of give a brief example of what machines you will find at that price range, unless it's used. We're just going to talk brand new prices just because that's my sales pitch voice in the back of my head. So around the 100 to 500 range, you're really going to find single boiler machines that are really small, designed to do one thing at a time, as in either brew a shot or steam. And so lead times for coffee are going to be drastically long. You might find that if you have a semi-decent sized church, that you're just not going to be able to brew and steam enough, unless you have multiple, which luckily enough, our assistant pastor actually had the identical machine, so we ended up using two. But even then, it was still pushing it. That's where you would find, like, the Bambinos are around $2.99 right now, brand new. That one's nice because it warms up really quick. So if there is a machine I would recommend in this price range, although I don't recommend any of the machines, it would be the Breville Bambino, just due to how quick it can change operations on the go. And that's just because of the type of boiler they use. Then you have your, of course, $100 DeLonghi's and everything around that range. And just a lot of kind of similar machines. They're all somewhat do the same thing. So if you were to pick one from that price range, again, I don't recommend it, it would be the Breville Bambino. Towards the 500 to, let's just say 500 to 1,000 and 600. Let's just kind of, expand a little bit, quite a bit. At that place, you're going to either find one of two machines. You're either going to find a brand new single boiler machine, much more bigger in the sense of boiler size and how much water it can do, but you are still going to run into the issue where you can't do both operations at the same time. And although lead times for a drink might be a little bit faster, still you're going to find yourself needing multiple machines or finding alternative ways to make drinks. This is where on the lower end you would find something like the Gaja Classic, Evo now, so there is a upgraded version of it. That's around, I believe, around $600 brand new. You can find used ones for much cheaper, but I wouldn't recommend buying these machines used at all. Any single boiler machine used is you're just kind of wanting to run into issues. And then you have the machine that I personally started off with when it became to my first big purchase, which was the Rancilio Silvia. And to give a little context on that one, because if you know anything about the coffee world, you probably know that this is a very bare bones machine for the price. It's quite expensive for what you get now. But at the time, which was either pre-COVID or during COVID now, there was really no options for single boiler machines that had modifications on it. What I say by that is the Silvia for about $899 now, I believe that's the newest price. What you're getting is a very bare bones machine with a single boiler. No way to really know what temperature you're at. It is a really big boiler for a single boiler, I will say that. You do get a lot of water in that machine. And if you were to steam, which I would say is its strongest suit, the machine overheats itself so high that the steam that comes out of it is quite a lot. But the issue with that is, since it's a single boiler machine, your steam is going to release really wet. And that's because so much pressure is inside of this really tiny boiler that when you open the steam one, it scoops a lot of the water from the bottom. And you're going to find this with every single boiler machine, apart from something like the Bambino that has a whole different type of boiler. So every like traditional, the $100 DeLonghi's, the Gaja Classic, the Sylvia, and then of course any of the upgraded versions that are not on the market today, which we will talk about, you'll run into that issue where you're going to have really wet steam. And that can mess up with milk, that can mess up your foam. If you really don't care about that, it's fine. But again, you're going to have to balance both brewing a shot and then heating up the boiler to steam, and then you're going to have to go back and cool it off. And I usually tell customers all the time that it takes about 7 minutes to make a latte, one latte, from start to finish. Like, you're grinding, you're heating up your steam boiler, you make your milk, because milk usually lasts a little bit longer heated than your espresso shot. Then you have to cool off the boiler, let it warm it up, brew your shot, pour your milk, out the window. So there's a lot of issues with the single boiler system. But what I do recommend at this price point, it's not a single boiler in the sense of a traditional one, which is just, when I say traditional, I mean like a capsule boiler, just has a heating element, has a lot of space. You fill it with water, that water comes out when you brew. What I do recommend at this price point, if you were to start a coffee shop with a tight budget, is the Breville Barista Express. The nice thing about the Express is that you can either buy new or used, although be careful with used. And the reason I say you could buy used for this model is because, one, they're just awfully cheap to find used, and two, most of the parts are available that you can source yourself and fix if needed. That does not go with any other Breville machine. It's just very specific to the Express and of course the Impress, but there's some newer parts on there that aren't available for sale. And so why I recommend the Breville Barista Express is due to how it heats up its water. It's not a traditional capsule boiler. It looks like one if you were to take the lid off. But what you will find under the hood is that you have a thermal block, which is pretty much a bunch of copper pipes that spin or that are kind of in a spiral. And of course, around these pipes, you have a really, really quick heating element. So what happens is that when you brew a shot, your water pump pushes water through these pipes that are hot almost instantly. It takes really no time to warm these up. And by the time it leaves, it's roughly 200 degrees when you're brewing. I believe that's what it's set to by Breville themselves. The cool thing about this, and this is the reason why I recommend it, is that say you needed to brew a shot and then make milk right after. Well, since you have a thermal block, you can flip the switch to steam mode in just a few seconds. If the machine has already been on and you brewed a shot or you waited no more than 3 minutes, you can instantly start steaming instantly, which is great, especially for like a place where you have to make a lot of drinks back to back to back to back. It's really nice for the price that you can get a brand new or a used one to kind of instantly make steam whenever you need to. Although you still have to wait, so you still have to brew your shot first and then wait for the shot to finish and then make steam. It's much faster, it's much more efficient, it's much more quick to do those two operations and to bounce back from that. Because what happens is when you're complete with the steam, once you flip the steam wand back to home position, all of the excess steam that was made will actually go down into your drip tray. So you don't have to worry about purging. You don't have to worry about if there's still steam in your boiler, because it all gets purged out right after you're done. And you can instantly go back to brewing another shot. Now, is the water that's going to come out of the boiler a little bit hotter than usual? Yes. But that's not too bad for making a lot of drinks rather fast. And especially for the price point. The price point is really good on these Barista Expresses. If I were to kind of bring up the price of a new one, there's two models that you can find. But starting brand new is around $700. So you're already cheaper than the Rancilio Sylvia or really any traditional single boiler machine, no matter what mods you have. For $100 more, I believe you could get the Impress, so you don't have to deal with taping. But that's not necessarily an issue that you need to really figure out right now. So this is my recommendation for a machine under $1,000. New or used, both are great. And it has really big perk. It has a built-in grinder. So you don't have to buy a grinder. You don't have to buy a separate piece of equipment. Everything's built into one. And that's really nice. Because with every other machine on this list, you are going to have to buy a grinder. You are going to have to spend more. You are going to get a better product on one end, but you do have to spend more. You do have to have a bigger budget. So that's my recommendation for under $1,000. If you want to start somewhere, I would skip everything before and everything up till this next category of machines. This next category is around 1,600 to... you could find some more expensive ones for 1,009, but we're just going to kind of dance in between there. And that's the heat exchanger system, or... so that would be the heat exchangers. Now, you're going to find a few different types of heat exchangers. It really doesn't matter which route you go because the system in itself is just very efficient. Now, there's some older traditional ones that are much more rugged than the newer style ones, and I'll kind of talk about different brands here in a second. But for the most part, if you want one machine that is really effective at making drinks back to back to back, it's kind of designed for it, this is where you would want to go on a budget. And so, what is a heat exchanger system? Pretty much what it is that instead of having one boiler that shares the operations of steaming and brewing, as in you overheat the same boiler that you're going to use to brew later, what it does is you have a really, really tall or wide drum boiler that's only for steaming. It's only for steaming and hot water. So most machines have knobs for both. If you were to use any of those knobs, you're pretty much taking what's inside of the boiler and bringing it out, whether that's steam or hot water. You might ask at that point, well, how do you get water into your group head to brew shots? What they do is they connect a copper pipe, they cut a hole through the steam boiler on both sides. And then what they do is they install a copper pipe or, a very specific pipe, stainless steel for some of them and aluminum for others, but mainly copper or stainless steel. And they install it to go straight through the steam boiler. Now, it doesn't touch, in a sense, like the water that runs through this pipe doesn't touch the water that's inside of the boiler at all. It's just in the same, it's built inside of it. Now, what happens is that when your steam boiler heats up to really high temperatures, because you have to make steam, whenever you pull the lever or click the button to brew a shot, cold water comes from the water tank, goes through that pipe that's pretty much traveling through your steam boiler, and by the time it leaves, it's roughly 200 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how often you use it. What that allows you to do, which is really nice, is that it allows you to brew a shot and steam at the same time, kind of like a commercial machine or a dual boiler, for about half the price. The only con about this system is that, or the biggest con is that, say you left the machine on for about, let's just say an hour. If you left the machine on for an hour, you come back to it, whether that's people just not ordering coffee or, it's slow, etc. What you'll find is that pipe got so hot that the water that was supposed to be used for brewing actually became steam. So what you have to do is you have to pull the lever or click the button to activate a shot and run cold water through that pipe so that all the steam that was built inside your exchanger comes out and you refill it with cold water. And that's the only con, at least in my opinion, for a heat exchanger. This is where I tell most, people who want to start a coffee shop and they just want kind of one machine that'll last them a really long time. Very simple machines too, so it's really easy to fix. This is the machine I actually recommend the most, or these types of machines. And the reason for that is just it's so effective at what it does. I personally owned a few, and I have one in my home right now. it's just so good to have a machine that you can brew and steam at the same time, and you don't have to worry about waiting. You can have a lot of drinks, in your lineup, and you can make all those drinks in due time as long as you're effective at brewing, as if the barista is skilled, of course. So this is like the golden spot if you want to start a coffee window or a coffee shop. Now I know it's expensive to to start in this range, but if you were to start in this range, you wouldn't have to upgrade for a very, very long time, unless you just want to. That's just, you know. So a few major brands that I'd recommend. I have I have right now in my home the Lelit Mara X. It's a really cool machine. It's more catered towards, I'd say it's more catered towards the home market because of a few different temperature options you're allowed to have on the machine. But there's one option that actually helps a lot in the commercial setting, which is you can purposefully overheat your boilers so that you could get a better steam quality. And I've used that system when people are over, and it's a really good system. It's really the only machine that has that. And then from like a different brand, just because I'm trying not to be biased here. You have the Rocket Apartamento, although I think it's very much too expensive for what you get now. They raise prices, and I just don't like the price point. You could get a Mara X for much cheaper, and it does much a better job. So there's the Rocket Apartamento, but you can find those used often, just because there's so much of them out there on the market. Profitec has quite a bit of heat exchangers. They kind of tend to over, how would I say this? They have too big of a catalog, in my opinion. They've been shortening it recently. They've been getting rid of a few models. I would recommend buying the newer ones, and the reason I recommend buying those is that the older heat exchangers, a lot of their parts are not being produced anymore. This is just a mechanic perspective. So say you find a Pro 600, 700. I think one of those is a dual boiler. What you might find is that you can't buy PIDs. The relays are about the same, but you just can't find specific parts anymore, and you don't want to run into that, especially if you're going to pay a lot of money for a machine. So stick to notable brands, or stick to their newest catalog. So Profitec has a few new heat exchanger machines. Lila only has one, so it's really easy to remember. Rocket, the Apartamento, has never changed, apart from a motherboard swap. So all those parts are available. And there's other notable brands that I don't necessarily recommend, but they are out there. You have ECM, which is Profitec's mother company, I believe. Well, at least they own Profitec. You have a few smaller brands like Isomac, VBM, and a few others just kind of trinkle in there. But what I would recommend if you were to go to the heat exchanger system, because you're going to find two different heat exchangers. You're going to find a traditional group head where it has probably volumetric, so you just click a button. It does all of the water volumetrics for you, and then it stops the shot when it needs to. Or you have the E61, which is a completely different group head. It's very mechanical. I'd recommend going E61. It's a little bit of a premium, but what you're getting is you're getting a very, very easy machine to take care of and to work on. Instead of electronics, you're relying on valves and springs, which is really nice. So that's pretty much the third category. That's around under $2,000 you can find heat exchangers. You can find used ones for cheaper, or you can go brand new and be great. Then there's the fourth category. The fourth category is your, I'd consider semi-commercial machines. The reason I say semi is that they're small enough to move with one person, and they're only one group, so you only have one group head. However, you get a lot of quality of life when it comes to a commercial setting, and some of them are actually rated commercial, which means that you can use them in a proper coffee shop setting. Howbeit, you have to follow food safety laws. These machines, I really only have one recommendation here, but you can find a lot of machines online that fit this criteria. But my personal recommendation, just from a price or a performance per dollar and what you get for the money and how easy it is to use and the steam quality and so much more, is the machine I'm using personally in our, coffee window. And what that is, it's two machines, but same thing. They're made the same way, just modified slightly different. You either have the Spaziale, La Spaziale S1, which is the machine I personally own, or S2, or the Luca A53 plumb-in only. Very specific which one it is. Plumb-in only. That means it doesn't have a water tank. So with these machines, you're going to have to, since it's commercially rated, you're going to have to use it in a commercial way. That's how I would describe it. What I mean by that is that you lose water tanks, as in you can't refill it from the outside of the machine. There's no, tank to pour water into, or there's no valve you can open. How you fill these machines is that you connect it to a water line that's usually connected to a pressure regulator if you're using it from a hard line, like if you're using it from like a pipe that goes to a sink. And that, of course, would be connected to some sort of filter. Or you could go the easy route, which is what we did, is you can buy a external water pump, which you can find easily online for around mid $200, and you could connect your machine to like a Alhambra jug or a water jug that are used for those water dispensing units. That's the easiest way of doing it. Doesn't require filters, just requires good water and a pump. This is what most coffee carts use. It's that kind of system, just either more commercial or using the 15 amp external pumps like we use. Now, what you get at this price range, which this price range is mid 2000s, is the reason why I picked the Spaziale and the Luca A53s, because it's actually the cheapest dual boiler that's commercially rated that I could find online. That's actually worth it, in my opinion. And why it's that specific version is worth it compared to like the home variants of it, the ones with water tanks, is you're going to get two things. And we're going to touch on one of these things later when we get to maintenance. But what you get is on these specific models, these two, the Spaziale S2 or S1, I believe, and the Luca A53 plumb-in only, is that you get a almost double the size of a steam boiler that you would get on the home machines. Now, that's really weird for them to skip out on that, but I totally understand why. Why they did that is the home machines where the water tank would be, which is on the left side of the machine, that's actually where your steam boiler is at. Now, on the home ones, they saw it in half, and they pretty much put half the size of a boiler on top, and then they fit the water tank on the bottom so that everything's compact. The shell is completely the same. It's just added that frame for your water tank, plus the boiler has to be cut in half. But on these plumbed-in versions, you don't have that. So you get double the size, really tall boiler, really good steam quality, but you have to plumb it in. And at that price range, it's really the best machine you could get. And it's not, you're not even, I wouldn't even say you're really sacrificing anything. It's just a really good machine for both the A53 and the S1 or S2. So this is where I would recommend people to go to if you just want to buy a really solid machine. You probably want to do events like conferences for your church, and you want to have like your machine on a cart, or if you just want to do a coffee cart with this machine, this is the machine to do it. It's NSF compliant. That's usually what you're looking for when it comes to machines like this. Well, the La Spaziale S1 is completely NSF compliant, but the A53, I believe I forget the term they use, but it's configured in a way to where you could use it for a commercial setting if you use it a specific way. There's a lot of other machines at this price range that are either a little bit better or worse, but in general, they all have their pros and cons. This is the one I pinpointed to being the best bang for your buck, the best way to get into the commercial setting, the best machine performance per dollar that you can get right now at around mid 2000. I believe it's around 2,600-ish. Brand new. So that's the fourth category, and that's really the only recommendation I give. The fifth category, this is where you go full-blown commercial, but you're on a budget. And the reason I say you're on a budget is that There's two categories of commercial machines that you can really find right now. You have the heat exchanger commercials, which is just a really big heat exchanger. So kind of going back to the third category where we're talking about heat exchangers and all the smaller ones. Well, they make very big commercial versions of that. All the pros and cons are exactly the same, as in if you leave the machine on for too long without using it, that pipe gets really hot, you have to purge it. But you get the benefit of a really big steam boiler with a lot of steam that would never run out no matter how long you use it. And the brand I'd recommend for this category, it's probably one of the cheaper ones, but it's nice because it has volumetrics, is that of the Rocket Boxer. I've sold this machine to a church based out in LA. I don't know how it's going. They haven't texted me back about, how's it rocking with it. But from experiences and from working on them, this is a really solid option for just a workhorse, built to last heat exchanger system that you just don't want to, want to buy one unit and you're set, you're golden. This would be it. I forget the price range this is at, so let's just search it on my PC here. At around the 6,000, you could buy a one group for about 5,000. And the nice thing about the one group is you can either buy it in 120 volts or I believe 240. So if you want to use it in a commercial setting, you can. These machines are just going to be the workhorse of whatever you're deciding to do. Now, these things are really big, so once it's on the counter, it's really not moving. But what you get is you get a really big, really powerful steam wand. You get volumetrics. You get to control a little bit using the settings built into the machine. You get nice hot water tap, just premium features all around, built really well. And this is what I'd recommend if you want to get a commercial machine that's just really good, really solid workhorse. Really no issues apart from the purging of the group head, which we talked about with the heat exchangers. But again, if your baristas know what to do, this is where you want to go, because they're just designed to build to take a beating. Then the last category, I only have one brand in here, and we're going to talk about a lot of different brands, but I only really got one. And the reason I got one is because they're kind of the kings when it comes to espresso building, or espresso machine building, espresso in general, in my opinion. This is my personal opinion. And from personal experience, it's the easiest of machines to work on. If you work at a repair shop at least, it's the easiest brand to get into. You can find the most used machines. They sell the most commercial machines, I believe. And that's the sixth category, which is the most expensive, that being the Lamazoko line. Now, I have a personal bias because I was actually trained by Lamazoko themselves for a few days to work on their machines, and I got to experience that and all of its greatness, if I were to describe it. The reason I only categorize them is for a few reasons. Now, yes, they're really expensive. Basic models, like very basic models, are starting at around 1,100 or 11,000. That's like very bare bones. You can find a lot of used ones because, again, they sold the most machines. They've been making machines for eons now, all hand assembled in Florence out of their factories, and then of course imported. They have a lot of different models that you could kind of really geek out on and figure out which one fits your needs. However, these are the most easiest machines to work on ever. Now, that's probably 70% of the reason why I recommend Lamazoko. And a lot of people don't listen to that. And a lot of people end up with a machine that's really hard to find somebody to service, really expensive to service, and have more electronics than is needed to get a really good shot. And the reason I say electronics, because you can only imagine what having a bunch of electronics inside of a pressurized water boiler could do when it starts leaking. So this is why I recommend Lamazoko the most. Again, I have a bias, but I'm going to allow my bias to benefit somebody. There's a lot of the time people buy a machine that they think is going to be cool, they put it in a church, and I just know in the back of my mind that they're going to run into issues because the machines are too complicated, and you really don't get much more because of the complication. And as much as I love to help people, I'm just not. Brands in this category are like Slayer is the biggest one, and I know that will ruffle enough feathers if it gets to the right ears. But it's just why, especially if this is a first coffee shop situation. Now, I love Slayer and I love Keith Vanderwesten and I love, well, there's actually a few other brands that are nice to get into, so I'm just gonna list those two. There's just no reason to get that complicated, and you're not really getting much back for that complication. La Marzocco is a lot like the Rolex of the espresso game. You're buying a lot for the name, but there's a reason why that name's really expensive. And that's because they make really solid machines, all hand assembled, as in there's a really nice premium to all of these. It's just very luxurious, just very put together. It's years of refining and years of figuring out what works and what doesn't. They're built to last. You really find machines that are just very old and are still kicking. I actually have one from the 80s in my backyard right now, and it's barely broken, as in, like, it's just given out completely now. It's from the 80s. The parts, this is the debatable part because I have a lot of friends who say otherwise, but the parts are almost readily available all the time, especially if you're a service center, or if you have a service center or someone who can repair your machines, and they're official. Official means a lot. And they make a really good coffee. And so this is where I'd recommend people if they just want a one and done. They want to start a real coffee shop with real coffee, real baristas, just everything being as premium as it could get. But just know where to put your money at. This is where you want to, because they're just so easy to use. They last the longest. They're the easiest to maintain. The nice thing about having a machine that's completely assembled by hand is that they're designed to be built, which means they're designed to be broken apart and designed to be worked on. That's the biggest thing people don't think about when it comes to buying a commercial machine. Every single La Marzocco machine is built to be worked on. And that's really nice to have the ability to work on your machine without any issues. Slayer, on the other hand, you kind of have a degree in this stuff to even consider working on it. Although they are really nice when it comes to customer support and all that. So that's really the 6 different categories when it comes to machines, their pricings, which one to choose. So I'm going to just kind of briefly go over them just so you can kind of have it in one line. You have the lower end, which is your Gaggia Classics, your Bambino. These are not the greatest when it comes to making rapid shots, but if you need to start somewhere, these are good. The mid-1,000 range, you have the Breville Barista Express. Highly recommend because you can switch between operations really quick. Has a really quick turnaround time. You can find them used for pretty good, and you can fix them with parts online. They do break often because they are made by a lot of plastic, so just just know that you're going to have to repair the stuff. At the third price range, you have your heat exchangers, your small home heat exchangers. Excuse me. Your small home heat exchangers like Leolit, Mara X, Rocket Apartamento, whatever Profitec's making these days. ECM has some, and a few other small Italian brands. At your fourth price range, this is your NSF rated commercial home machines, I would consider them. These are around the mid 2000s. And the 2 I recommend is La Spaziale S1 or S2, I always forget what number, and the Luke A53 direct plumb in only, no water tanks. Fifth price point, middle 10,000s, like, under 10,000. Your Rocket Boxer is my recommendation for heat exchanger commercial machine. Lastly, 6th category, if you had all the money in the world, buy a La Marzocco. Please just buy a La Marzocco. I don't get commission, so I wish. Cool. So we kind of went over all the machines and their price ranges. Now I want to kind of get into coffee and grinders a little bit. We're not going to touch all the grinders. I am going to reference the most common grinders you can find and where to find them, and maybe a little bit of prices if I remember. But at some point, ain't a coffee shop without coffee, right? So you have to find beans. You have to figure out what bean you want to use and correlate that a lot with what machine you're using. Because if you get specific coffee that requires specific directions for temperature, but you buy a heat exchanger, it might, you have to consider this stuff. So, getting coffee, it's probably the easiest way to get coffee is either the store. I don't recommend that way though, because you never know when things are roasted. Good buy dates are not great, or best buy dates are not accurate at all. And this is where I started, but I just don't recommend it. You can easily find a local roaster in your area, probably, unless you live in the boonies, and source coffee from them. Pricing, do pricing whatever you like. What I'd recommend to start off with is medium roast, and the reason I recommend a medium roast is because it's pretty universal what you can do with a medium roast, and most machines are designed to brew that. Not in the sense of they built them to only brew medium roast, but even the heat exchangers are roughly trying to get towards that 201 Fahrenheit. And so that's usually where you want to brew coffee, medium roast coffee. Espresso roast, because espresso roasting is completely different to, other coffee. Dark roast is awesome. And the reason I say awesome, even though I don't drink it, the reason why it's awesome, and I would debate anybody who says burnt coffee is terrible. And the reason why I say that is because dark roast tastes the best with milk. This is why people buy it. This is why coffee shops use it. This is why dark roast is probably the most drink roast of them all, because it tastes really good with milk. Doesn't taste good by itself. Doesn't taste good in water-based drinks. It tastes good with milk. Most people who drink coffee drink it with milk or creamer. Debate me over burnt coffee. You don't know nothing. The issue with dark roast, though, the biggest issue is that you need a really big grinder, because the coffee can either be just too oily or just cooked to oblivion, to where your small home flatbed grinder, or even, cheaper, if you were to put dark roast in the Barista Express, you're going to get a really bad experience out of it. If you are going to do dark roast, because most coffee shops usually do, buy a commercial grinder or a really big grinder. There's a distinction between commercial and really big, because there's some really big home grinders that could work, and then there's commercial grinders. Light roast is really for water-based drinks or by itself, because that's just what it takes. You get a lot of fruity notes. You can mix it with milk. I wouldn't, unless it's really specialty coffee. I've tried some different ones that worked. But for the most part, stick to medium roast or dark roast if you have the grinder. Common grinders you can start off with if you need to buy a separate grinder or your machine doesn't have one built in. Eureka has really good grinders. They're very silent, but you have to use medium roast. Only use medium roast. Dark roast is really bad unless you get the bigger versions, like the Atom 65, 75. Those are really good grinders for dark roast because they're really big, have really big burrs, really big motors, so it allows you to grind coffee of that roast really well. The Eureka kind of medium line is your Silencio, your Specialita, your Libra. Those are really good for medium roast. I'd only stick to medium roast on those. You could go cheaper. You could go Baratza ESP or the Baratza ESP Pro. I don't recommend it because you're just going to break it at that point. It's really cheap grinders. But if you are on a budget, like if say you buy a Bambino, since Bambino doesn't have a grinder, you need to buy a separate grinder. I would recommend something like the ESP or the ESP Pro. But I would say if you buy a heat exchanger, do not go with the bottom of the barrel. These grinders are built to stay with you for a really long time, so buy a really nice one. It'll outlive all your machines. Okay, so that was, oh, and then alternative drinks. I don't even know why that's in that category. Wait, that's for a whole different segment. We're gonna drop that. Cool. So we're on. That's pretty much coffee. Now coffee's complex. Usually you want to brew dark roast at a lighter temperature because you've already roasted it enough. You don't need to roast it anymore with hot water. Light roast, you need to go higher temperatures because you didn't roast it enough, so you need to cook it a little bit more to extract all those nice fruity flavors. And then of course medium roast is middle of the barrel, not oily, not too dry, just roasted enough to where you can make some really good drinks. And you can use it both ways. If you want someone who can drink an espresso by itself, or a water-based drink, or if you want someone who can make a latte, it tastes great in both because it's a mix of both. So you get the same bean roasted 3 different ways, but the medium roast can go both ways. I hope that, I hope that makes sense. Third one is probably the one that I'm most familiar with now because this is what I do for a living, is maintenance. Maintenance on these things. These things do not just forever live in, in the garden when you're using these things. These things die at some point, and there's ways to prevent it from dying. Now, I do have 3 different categories, but we're probably going to get off rabbit trails a bunch. But the first one is how often should you service your machine? Now, there's 2 ways of going about this. Depends on model, of course. Some machines can be completely maintained at home or at your coffee shop. And some of them do need to go in for proper cleaning, especially if you're not going to use any good water. You're not going to, go through all the hoops to make sure it's working well. Pretty much anything that's not a heat exchanger and lower, so like all the Brevels, all the single boilers, you can service all of those in shop. You don't need to call nobody. It's really easy to find videos on descaling, replacing gaskets, back flushing, yada yada. They're really quick to service, so I would service them descale every 3 months, back flush if you're using it in a commercial setting, back flush every day when you're done, so you don't have a lot of coffee buildup, especially if you're making a lot of drinks. And yeah, when you run into a electrical issue, you run into a sealant issue, you can send it to a shop or you could try doing it yourself. It's really simple. You can find a lot of people online on like coffee forums, and that'll help you and guide you through that. Heat exchangers. Heat exchangers are really nice to keep clean because there's only one boiler in there. It's much bigger, so it takes a little bit more time. But you do get a lot of leeway because usually that a lot of that new space that you have with the bigger boiler and the copper pipes and the heat exchanger pipe and sometimes if you have a E61, you have a lot of room for error when it comes to scale, but still please descale every 3 months or 3 to 6 months. Back flush every time you're finished for the shift, or every month if you're using this in a home setting. And when it comes to servicing these ones for like bigger issues, that's where I would actually recommend having a shop do it. Or you can, DIY, do it yourself, descale the machine. It does take longer. And some parts might not be able to find online just because, you're not an official service center. So, but they're really easy to work on. So that's kind of the thing there. Commercial machines, this is where if you're having a high volume coffee shop, you want to get a service every 3 months officially, not by that guy who can use a multimeter in your church. I mean, if you want to, you can. Just pray when you get shocked. You want to get those service every 3 months, especially if you're going to go with the Lamazoco line. So what I say by 3 months in this category of machines, the last category, which was, service stout, I would consider that the heat exchangers and, of course, the Spaziale Luca. For the Rocket Boxer and equivalent, Lamazoco and equivalent, I would recommend those on a 3-month PM from a really good repair shop if you have one nearby. Or do your research and find the PM sheets online. So Lamazoco actually has all the PMs on their website, so you can actually anticipate what you're going to have to test and what you're going to have to work on. But don't just work on your machines. These things are too expensive to mess up. And the worst thing is if you mess it up too bad, either one or two things happen. 1, somebody gets injured, or 2, you're out of a coffee machine until somebody comes out and fixes your mess. So Get those serviced every 3 months. Usually the 3 and the 9 month are really easy to do, as in they're just rudimentary cleanings, replacing gaskets, especially if you're in high volume. The 6 and the 12 month, however, are rebuilding a few things just to make sure they're doing well, like steam wand assemblies, replacing valves to make sure everything is safe and good, checking on your water, and checking on everything. I would recommend doing that. Okay, so we got over that. I'm going to skip the 2 other ones in the maintenance just because this episode's getting long, but what can you do before calling in a service? You can test the machine with a service center or with the manufacturer or the place you bought it from. Again, with the commercial machines, it's completely different. Don't do that. You could, but don't. For the home machines, you can. There's a lot of good customer support. Just be patient with them. And the last one, safety and troubleshooting. Again, it's a safety thing. Always unplug your machines. There's some parts of the machine that do require the machine to be on, like SSRs and relays and motherboards. So there's always going to be an aspect of it where you do have to be a little bit, unsafe. You have to be in an unsafe environment. But that's where I would recommend just sending it to a shop. What you're going to do to keep this stuff maintained is, for all the lower end machines, when I say lower end now, I'm going to just refer to everything that's not commercial. You're going to backflush every time you're done. You're going to descale whenever, whatever timeline works for you, but at least twice a year. And you're just going to treat the machine correctly. Don't forget, make this a part of the coffee shop workflow, is cleaning it. Because it gets really expensive really quick, no matter what price range. And, if you're not doing this with your Bambino, you're going to just have to buy a new Bambino. There's no fixing a machine that you can't buy parts for, and etc. So just know, keep your stuff clean. Lastly, or I guess second to last when it comes to points, is resources. So what I mean by resources is, what do you need to, like equipment or things, accessories, cups, milks, recipes, you name it. Those resources. What do you need to get started? What to consider? Stuff like that. Now, I want to start with cup size, because this one is, you can really go multiple ways. We were blessed enough to get a lot of free cups in the correct 16-ounce sizing, so that's really nice. But you are going to need cups. There's 3 common sizings that you can find. That's the 8-ounce, 12-ounce, and 16-ounce cups. These are pretty much the same concept, as in they hold coffee, they hold hot liquid, but they're designed for 3 different recipes. They're designed for your cortados, they're designed for your cappuccinos, and they're designed for your lattes. Now, can you use a 16-ounce cup with any drink? Yes, you can. So if you just want to buy a bunch of 16 ounces, that's perfectly normal, and people could drink cappuccinos with half a cup missing. That's a good way to save on cost, but those are just the 3 common cups. And of course, lids, stirs, straws, whatever you need to buy. Those are all common, but just buy 16-ounce cups. That would make pretty much anything you need, unless you really want a tall or short cup. Alternative milks, you have a bunch of different ones. You have pretty much all the plant-based ones. So you have your almond, your oat. The oat is pretty good because it's naturally really fatty. Almond is a little bit hard to figure out, but if you buy barista versions or barista blends of these milks, you can really have a good experience steaming them. My voice is going out, holy crud. Low-fat milk, just know when you're steaming it, you're not going to be able to get such a great foam with it because of that fat. There's not a lot of fat inside your milk, so the foam kind of dissipates really quick. You might be able to make nice art for a few seconds and then it's gone. Alternative recipes. Now, this is an important one because this is actually a concept not a lot of people talk about when it comes to the coffee shop world. And that's the concept of drink variety and how that helps a barista when it comes to brewing. Goodness, I think I'm sick at this point. Excuse me. Pretty much, the concept is, if all you serve is coffee and you're using a machine that can only brew one drink at a time, what you're going to find is that your baristas are probably, if you have a decent sized church or a decent sized gathering, you're probably going to be really stressed. And the reason for that is because you're going to pile up a bunch of drinks, and all those drinks require this one specific machine that's already being used to be operating, and you can only go one at a time. So this is the main reason why you would want to make your menu not too expansive, but expansive enough to where you can take a lot of the load off of the espresso machine and divert it to either other baristas at other different parts, stirring matchas or dropping tea bags in hot water or making chais or making hot chocolates. And you can really, really help your machine overall and how often it's used and just really help the baristas out. Again, I named 4 or 5 drinks there. The chais, hot chocolates, you can make drip, which is really nice, just normal house coffee, teas, matchas. All these drinks kind of divert stress or load off of the espresso machine and off the barista who's using the espresso machine. Now, the cool thing about the nicer heat exchangers and higher is that you can have a lot of hot milk-based drinks, but it doesn't necessarily require extra stress or extra load because the steam boilers on these machines are already pretty much packed with steam, so you're not going to run out. So say you have, let's just give an example, you have 3 coffee drinks, you have 2 matchas that require hot milk. Well, the nice thing about that is that let's just randomize the order. So let's say it's 2 coffee drinks, a matcha, coffee, matcha. So you have that line. Well, you can brew your shot. You can make a big pitcher of milk, right? You can make a big pitcher. So you already brewed your one shot, or you're in the process of brewing your one shot. You get a really big pitcher of milk. That's probably for 2 drinks. You can steam your milk, pour 1 drink's worth of milk into your espresso and pour the second half into a matcha that's down the line and get rid of 2 drinks with the same amount of time. And it's really nice. So really it doesn't add load, although it looks like the machine is dependent on more. It doesn't really add up to excess load. So this is why drink variety is important. Not because more people, more options, although that's always a good option, but just because it can help the baristas and help your workflow a lot more, especially in a high volume environment. And so yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on resources. I mean, there's a lot more. There's sugars and honeys and different specialty recipes. There's cold brew. There's, pour overs. You can really kind of divert, but this is really to start to if you just want to start a coffee shop from the ground up, what you need and your thoughts about it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This has been a long one. I could probably rattle on more, and it's probably really dense in information. But it's important, and it's just common questions that I'm asked a lot. Like, hey, what machines are good? What machines last? Where can I find used machines? And stuff like that. So just kind of final thoughts and my personal experience when it comes to coffee shops and in church. It's really good. I think it's a really good thing. Of course, there's always going to be some boundaries you have to set, and you have to respect the church and you have to respect, God's house. But for the most part, having a coffee shop in your church or even just a small window can be really beneficial to both people saints of God who've already been there, and of course to the people who just waltz on in, or the people who are invited for the first time to that, family Sunday, and they don't necessarily, have as much connections. Well, this could be another one, and it's really good to build that type of community inside of a church. And I guess an aspect of it, and you probably, if you're from the Apostolic Pentecostal world, you've probably seen this a lot. If you were to price your drinks, we personally don't. Everything's for free if you come to our church. But if you were to price your drinks, you can use that, income and turn it around towards the kingdom of God, whether that's missions or church expansion. Those carpets, we need to replace somehow. So yeah, you do unlock a new way, and you're not necessarily doing it for the money. You're just how would I describe this? Pretty much just fundraising at that point. That's what I would consider, just, you know, using it as an avenue to bless the kingdom of God and your local assembly. So yeah, that's pretty much, when done properly. This could really be beneficial to your church, which is why I'm super passionate about it. If you ever find me at a conference, I could talk years about this stuff and my thoughts and my experiences with, different machines, different coffees, all, etc. And so yeah, I hope this was, beneficial to you. It's really nice to finally get back in front of a mic and, figure out this networking stuff and figure out what works, what doesn't, and, all of the comments and from the first episode when it comes to in person, and all the people who've been helping me out. Thank you a lot. It actually really does help me, and I take everything into consideration, and I take everything into, I, as you could tell, it took me quite a while to make the second episode, but that's just because I care about people's, advice. I care about it because that's how I improve, and it's free. I don't have to buy a class online to how to be a proper communicator. So yeah, I hope this blesses you, and I hope you enjoyed it. And thank you so much for listening to episode 2. That was Survival Guides to Coffee Shops, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Peace.